meeting is being recorded.
Amazing.
Hello, 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 coaches and leaders. I have Dr. Jody Carrington on again with me. We have part two of our conversation. I love talking with her. We have such similar views on so many things. And I wanted to continue the conversation. Really, this conversation is going to be interesting because it's going to be bringing depth to some things that I think we talk about and also challenging some very, very common conversations that we have in education. And I think those of you listening to this episode, you're going to be surprised by some of the things that we talk about. So we're gonna, before we jump in, Dr. Jody, for those folks that were not able to listen to our first episode, can you give like a 30-second summary of who you are in the world?
You got it. Dr. Jody Carrington, I'm a clinical psychologist. I trained originally as a police psychologist up here in Canada and have a huge love for organizational stress and trauma. And then during my residency, I did a rotation with kids and I fell in love with the tiny humans. And I realized we know even less about kids and trauma than we know about adults and trauma. So I spent 10 years in a locked psychiatric inpatient unit with kids and their families, learning a lot about the mistakes we make in both of our respective professions, education and psychology. And we ask all the time what is wrong with kids, and we never ask what happened to kids. And so I've made the last probably 20 years of my career writing some books about that and speaking globally. I still have a tiny practice up here in Alberta, Canada. We have 3 babies. They're no babies anymore. Our twins are 11 and our oldest is 14. And, just trying to keep our shit together. That's essentially what's happening. And having a good time doing it. That's what's happening.
Love it. Okay, good. And have you written more than 3 books? I know of 3 books.
No, just 3. So Kids These
3,
Days
okay.
we self-published it first of all, and then it became a national bestseller, and it's probably the best parenting book I've ever read in my life. It's so fucking great. And when if you watch me with my own personal children, you wouldn't buy the book. Okay. So we are very good at telling other people how to do, but I really love the concept of relationship and connection and emotional regulation. And then I wrote a co-authored a book with one of my favorite kindergarten teachers. It's called Teachers These Days. And then HarperCollins picked up our next book, and it's called Feeling Seen. And it's been out in the world for about a year and is done beautifully. And so, yeah, I speak all about it. Like they're all really similar, all really about kids and how we stay connected in relationships. And then Feeling Seen is really about leadership and what I think the world needs to stay these days, because we're in the loneliness epidemic that is destroying so many of our hearts and souls.
Yes, I love that. And I loved Feeling Seen. The whole thing. So we're going to jump in here. A lot of the things we're talking about today is from Feeling Seen. So if those folks want to know more, grab the book. I'll put all the links to those books in the show notes so you can grab those. I want to dive right in here. I want to talk about authenticity. And you talk about, so first of all, this is my point of view. I think we loosely say the word authenticity and don't know what we're talking about. Like what is authenticity, right? Like what is, I authentically am mad at them. Like what does that mean? So you make a connection between authenticity and emotional dysregulation, which I was like, this is an incredible connection. So I'd love you to share, what do you think authenticity is? And then also, what's its relationship to emotional dysregulation?
I think there's a couple of prerequisites for authenticity. So let's go there and then we'll define what I think it is. I think every single human has the capacity for good. I have not met a single human on this planet who does not have the capacity. So many of us these days have lost access to it. And I think that the greatest way back to our good is through emotional regulation. And the definition of emotional regulation is how not to lose your friggin' mind. The most successful people among us, particularly leaders, will have that one skill: how to stay calm in times of distress, how not to lose your friggin' mind. And the only way you can learn that is somebody has to show you how to do it, which is essentially why I've devoted the vast majority of my career to educators, because they will spend more waking hours with our children in the next generations than primary caregivers will. And if the big people aren't emotionally regulated, the little people don't stand a chance. Okay. So when you have the capacity to stay emotionally regulated, to get back to your good, that is where your authenticity lies. Authenticity for me is a feeling. It is when you're in alignment with who you are and what you think you want in this world. And I think, so many people liken it to realness. I don't think you can be authentic when you're dysregulated, when you're trying to please people, when you don't think you're enough and you're wondering, are you fucking your kids up? Are you messing up this relationship? Are you shitty? Do people really notice you? I think that's really a difficult place to be authentic in. And I think we try really hard, particularly with the highlight reels and social media. And, we're the first generation of parents. We're the first generation of educators that have had access to social media. We do not have a script for it. And we are more overrun by data, inundated by data than any other information or any other generation that's preceded us. Okay. We're not designed for it. We are developing beyond human scale and our bodies can't make sense of it. So what we are losing, I would say at a rapid rate, is our capacity to be authentic because your best self, your good self, back to the good, the authentic place in you often happens when you are still, when you are quiet, when you have access to some really great grounding practices. And this is, there's a whole Eastern philosophical understanding that happens from a neurophysiological perspective. When you are regulated, you have access to the best parts of yourself. When you are emotionally dysregulated, you don't lose your ability to be great and empathic and kind and the most amazing teacher or leader. You lose access to it. And so the answer isn't to skill people up more, get better curriculum, teach better things. It is actually to get us back to the best parts of ourselves, where when we're emotionally regulated, that's where we find authenticity.
I love that. I was thinking about the stress responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Right, fawning is people pleasing as a stress response, and I just think about like when we're doing that, we are not emotionally regulated. We are not being our authentic selves. Like when we're that. Also, I'm thinking of the non. I love non examples. And another one, like being perfectionistic is not anyone's authentic self, nor is just people pleasing in general, right? Being a kind person could be part of your authentic self, but people pleasing is could be a stress response and is never part of our authenticity, our true selves.
Yeah, I think what's really important to distinguish though is like when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, that is a understandable human response to something where we feel like we're in danger or it's not safe. And given our histories, when you bring a baby home from the hospital, how they let you know what they need is they lose their friggin' mind. And we're given 3 emotional regulation strategies for free: fight, flight, and freeze. Okay. The only way you communicate when you bring a baby home, or when you bring a baby home from the hospital, the only way they communicate is they lose their friggin' mind. They go into this very dysregulated place. The job of big people is to regulate them, to put their lid back on, their prefrontal cortex back on. And we do that universally the exact same way. We engage in a rhythmic exchange in an effort to regulate a human. And this is true if you come upon a crying infant, regardless of age, race, religion, socioeconomic status, gender identity. If you come upon a crying infant crying in a car seat in the middle of nowhere, just, imagine. We are neurobiologically wired to pick up that baby. You can't just walk by that baby and be like, oh shit, I hope somebody gets that one. You are neurobiologically wired. And what you'll do is engage in a rhythmic exchange. Even if you've never held a baby, you've never had a baby, you don't know nothing about babies, because as humans, we all start in exactly the same place. Okay. We hear the heartbeat of our mamas. That is how every single human starts. Race is a social construct. And what happens in our most biggest times of distress is that if we have regulated humans around us, we will create emotional regulation strategies ourselves because people are showing us how to do that. If we come from multiple generations of abuse, neglect, and trauma, if we've been taught to be, you're not good enough, you're not big enough, you're not loud enough, you're not quiet enough, whatever the deal is, right? That's often where we get dysregulated. And that is where we lose access to the best parts of ourselves because we're like, what if, what if, what if? Okay. What is required then is not to try harder or be better, but to understand what happened in that story and assist in rewriting it. And I think that, we then beat ourselves up further when we're like, we can't regulate, or like, what's wrong with me? Why every time I have to stand in front of people, do I just freeze? Why, when I'm in a crowded room of people, I feel like I just want to fucking run? Why, when I am in a crowded room of people, I can't stop talking? Like, what is going on there? There's nothing wrong with those things inherently, but what I really often talk about as a psychologist is how do we get back into our bodies in those times where we can feel us, our shoulders are going up, and we're losing access to the best parts of ourselves. Okay.
Mhm.
And so it is so much about the somatic grounding in your body to get you back to that place because there's a story there. If nobody was ever there to tell you, okay, you got this, you are safe in this moment. You are no longer in that house. You are no longer in that system. You are no longer in, under that principle, whatever that deal is. Come on back to the best parts of you. And that's where we have access, right? But it's a practice.
Mhm.
It's a skill, particularly in this noisy world
Mhm.
where we have very few times of quiet, of still, of rest. And
Mhm.
the number one question I ask anybody, when I see them in my private practice and they're struggling with, mental health issues or they can't sleep or what, I mean, this is the number one question. How is your sleep? Because we need the capacity to regulate our systems and we wake up looking at our phones. We're the first generation of people who've done that, right? If you charge your phone by your bed, you're particularly screwed because you're not going to wake up before you even pee. You're looking at that thing. Me too. By the way, P.S. This is not me telling you to do something I don't already do. But I promise you, we want to get ahead of the game because we've also been taught by our parents, our leaders before us, go hard. Those who really want to get ahead will hustle, 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 hustle. But when we had that message, what we had built into our systems was that nobody could get us when we left work. Sundays in most cultures were sacred. There was time built in for rest. Now, your students, your clients, your employer, your children, your parents can get you at any second, and your body knows it because we all carry phones. And if you miss it, then, I have an Apple Watch strapped to me. So if by chance I miss this, right, I got the team snap, mom's getting me. If the kids have to call from school, which means this is a beautiful thing, but our neurophysiology never rests. And then in the evening, all we wanna do is watch a show, and we don't
Mhm.
fulfill our relationship capacity because we're just too exhausted to do it. The hardest thing
Mhm.
we will ever do is look at each other, and we've
Yep.
never needed it more often than we need it now.
Yep. And to the coaches and leaders listening, there's the emotional regulation that we can provide ourselves, and we can, in coaching conversations, we can create a psychologically safe space so the other person can regulate themselves, right? We can never regulate someone, but we can provide a safe space so that they can show up regulated or become regulated within our space. And adversely, we can create unintentionally an unsafe space. So a regulated person suddenly becomes dysregulated as well.
Yeah, like, you can't tell think about this, the last time in the history of the world telling somebody to calm down has
Yeah.
calmed down ever worked. And the ins in education, we just do this all the time, you start clapping when people are losing their minds, like, this thing you do, right?
Yeah.
You can't when people are unsafe, being able to get them back to a place of calm is important, right? When safety is an issue, all bets are off. But what I'm talking about, when you're leading somebody, when you're coaching somebody, your demeanor, your assuredness, your ability
Mhm.
to regulate emotion is not in what you say. It is much more in how you show up.
Mhm.
And this is true for kids, this is true for your partner, and I always say this, it's not about the skills that we develop. If you're not okay, the people you lead and the people you love, they won't be either.
Mhm.
Because particularly in positions of authority or teaching or, professional development, we're really looking to the one at the helm to be able to walk us through it. And so much of it is sort of showing having these conversations, and then having the people that you're working with experience it. When they're like, I don't know what to do. This is ridiculous. Holy shit. Like, this is happening. This is happening. And you can say simply like this, okay, tell me more.
Mhm.
Tell me more. Let's figure this out. Okay.
Mhm.
And then you can unpack that next week. And you could be like, remember when if you need to draw that connection, remember when it was just like, it felt like out of the world, you had that complaint against you and this happened and you were losing your job, remember how we responded to that? Do you remember what happened? Oh, yeah. You just said, tell me more. And like, so what was that like in your body? Well, it calmed me right down. And you see that that becomes probably the most important skill you will ever use in your work is being able to just acknowledge the emotion between two people first And it could be frustrating. It could be like, yeah, but tell me what to do. Yeah, we'll get there. I absolutely. Right. Let's figure out what's going on here first. What am I missing? What's the hardest part?
Mhm.
Any of those things will really sort of get us back into a place. And this, I mean, again, it works with every human. But I think the greatest answer to this very lonely world in this moment isn't about creating more structure or policies or interventions. It's really about upping our connection.
Mhm.
And I always boil it down to this one word, right? Acknowledgement. When you are acknowledged, you rise. Full stop.
Mhm. You just said something that I wanted to highlight. Oh gosh, and it left my brain for a second. Oh, you asked this really poignant question. What's the hardest part? So I just want to back up for a second and kind of rewind here, because here we are in the coaching conversation. A teacher comes in, they're upset, they're "Ugh, I can't believe, or they're frazzled, or angry or complaining, right? And I think it's a very human default reaction to want to fix it. Right? I feel it. I feel it. And it is many times very it can be very detrimental to jump in to fix it, right? And I love, and then people are like, well, what do I do if I'm not going to fix it? What do I do? And I love how you said, well, what's the hardest part? And not only what you said, how you said it, your way of being. And I also want to highlight, for me as a coach, showing up to be able to calmly and lovingly say, what's the hardest part? I have to be regulated first.
Hmm. Hmm. You become the most important person in the world. And I think about, as leaders, as coaches, we have three priorities in this generation of leading people. And it's really you, your teams, and then the people you serve in that order.
Mhm.
And I think, to your point, I think it's really interesting because we are so compelled to fix, sorry, particularly as parents and when we're in leadership positions, people come to us with their problems. That's sort of the issue. Like we're there to sort of navigate the good stuff and the issues. And it's not about not providing a solution. Okay. I think what we have to misunderstand in this space is it's really like the beat between those two, between addressing the issue and fixing it or coming up with a strategy. It is that middle place that if you can simply acknowledge the emotion, bring it back down, they often have the answers themselves.
Oh,
Like I
that's
think
very
about
true.
this so much. Right. Well, in grief, for example, I'll give you an example where you can't fix it. So if I think about people who, come into my practice and say like I've just buried my baby, or my husband has cheated on me, or, whatever, any other big emotionally dysregulating experience. There is not a single thing I can say that will fix that. And if I try, I usually mess it up. Well, he wasn't that nice anyway. Think about all the new people you could date. At least you got to have her till she was 4. Um, we try so hard because we don't want people to be emotionally dysregulated. We want them to feel better. But the truth is, the quickest way to feeling better is just to allow another to feel seen.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when we sink right into that emotion, it means I have to be regulated. If I'm in my head, I mean, I read about this in kids these days. I'll tell you the story real quick. So I had one of my best friends and I got pregnant at the same time with our first babies, and our husbands grew up together, and so we became friends because of our husbands. And she was 3 weeks ahead of me in the pregnancy, and so we did everything together. Back in we got married at the same time, we got pregnant at the same time, all the things. And Jillian was born at 42 weeks. And because of doctor error, she didn't live. And I remember thinking, I mean, we had spent so much time together. And so she came home from the hospital without a baby. And I still had 3 weeks left in my pregnancy, and she didn't want to see anybody. And then a week into it, she just said, the only person I need to talk to right now is Jody. And I was like, holy how do I not look pregnant? Okay. So like I'm at this moment, I am 39 and a half weeks pregnant. And I'm like, I got a baby, and they will always now be the same age, born in the same year. And so I was like, I can't, Aaron, like, what do I do? Like, I need a big shirt. I need to not look pregnant. I need to what do I do? What do I say? What is the thing? And I was like, I was having these thoughts like, okay, they need popcorn. I'm going to bring popcorn, but I don't want to bring like anything that is pink, like Himalayan salt colored, because I don't want them to be reminded of their daughter, of Jillian. And there was nothing that I could do in that moment other than to show up.
Mhm.
And I said, "Tell me about her." And we both dropped to our knees. And I mean, I fell over to the side because I was so fat with its baby. And we just talked about what this was going to be like, if and when our baby arrived safe. And, we talked about Jillian, and I saw pictures of her, and we talked about all the things and cried and tried to figure out all the things about, what do we do with the milk and what do we do with the things. And there was not a single thing that I could have said or that I can say today that fixes it. I never miss her birthday. I know every time they look at our son, we think about, what would Jillian be like now? And I think I give you that example because it is the same degree of attempting to fix even a question about how come nobody takes my supervision? How come nobody likes to see you're not going to come up with something in that moment initially that's going to be fantastic, but you can say, what's the hardest part? Tell
Mhm.
me more. What do you
Mhm.
think's happening here?
Mhm.
What's getting in the way? All of those things. And, then their lids come back on. Colleen's lid came back on. We could laugh and cry and do all of those things. The emotional processing of what you feel like in that instance is way more important than actually what has happened.
Mhm. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. All right, I want to shift into talking about balance. In your book, you say balance is unachievable bullshit.
Yeah.
And I want to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's dumb. Okay, so we come from a generation of like work-life balance, which is absolutely asinine right now. There's no work-life balance, mostly because I think we just need to change the terminology significantly. If I think about one generation ago, okay, so this isn't like ancient history. This is my father. He would come home from work at 5:30 or whenever, sometimes a little bit later, whatever. But when he walked through the doors of our house, nobody could get him. So it was considered a safe place. It literally, and we talk about, creating sanctities in our own homes. It is so asinine in this moment because anybody can get you.
Mm.
Now, he would come through the door. It would be supper time. Sure, if there was an emergency, we had the house phone. Okay, fine. But you wouldn't answer it during dinner. That was just the answer. So we would sit down. He would watch MASH. And in the evenings, right, like there was no continued connection. Now, you think about us. We wake up in the morning and before we pee, we're checking our phones, many of us, right? We want to get ahead of the game, right? Just get these emails out of the way. I promise you, there is nothing in that email that has happened between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. that is going to lower your cortisol. Nobody's going to send an email and be like, Becca, you know what? I just think you're so amazing. Most of the time, we're going through our email before we even pee, like, oh, son of a bitch. God, so our shoulders get up. And then now we have access to social media and instant connection to other people.
Mhm.
When our mothers woke up, there was sort of like, oh, are we going to meet somebody for coffee today? There wasn't like, okay, she's worked out. They've got family pictures. They're drinking the cortisol. Fuck them. Oh my God. They got together last night without me. All of those things happen in our bodies right away.
Mhm.
We are not designed to carry this much cortisol. And so we take that into our kitchens and our babies say to us, what's for breakfast? And we're like, we don't know. And then we get to work and, we better listen to a podcast on the way to work because we're trying to develop ourselves, and then we're trying to read this book and we're doing this and we're sitting at our desk trying to like be thoughtful about whatever we're contributing to our place of work and our emails dinging,
Mhm.
our watches are going off and
Mhm.
there's not a reprieve at all. And so the capacity balance is bullshit because you will never arrive,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't stop trying. And I think the answer to this is we have to rest now on purpose. I am such a huge fan of normalizing naps.
Mhm.
I'm such a huge fan of giving yourself full permission to drive home in silence,
Mhm.
to get a snack, a good snack on the way home, regulate your system. Because, we've talked about this earlier, so many of us are just in survival mode. Let's just get to the next holiday.
Mhm.
Let's just win this war today so that we can just like, it's almost Thursday. It's almost Friday. Like, okay, so the end of the year. And this is like a narrative that I think is so interesting in education, right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but like May comes the same time every year. Did you know that? Shocking. And every time I step in with administrators, they're like, like starting in February. I'm like,
Mm,
what are you doing? Like, we know it's like, it's okay. Like, don't miss this crop of babies
mhm,
that are really interested in watching how you interact with each other.
mhm,
They're gonna remember how much joy there was in the hallways, not how to Pythagorean theorem Bunsen burner shit, you know? And I think that or how cool your bulletin board was. Like, I just think, like, it's really this switch into this idea that you can't no government official is gonna fix this. No superintendent, no school district's gonna come out with, "Here's the fucking 5 things we need to do to get through this." Nup, bup, 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 bup. It's you and me doing the next best right kind thing. You
mhm,
don't deserve to go into, a war zone every day when you feel like it's a war zone every day. Don't.
mhm,
Don't do that anymore. Where's the good?
mhm,
I
mhm,
need you to get back to your good. Do you know that every single day, like 50% of all kids right now, 1 in 2, in the world of adolescence would say that they don't know in the last 7 days if anybody cares about them.
mhm,
It is a loneliness epidemic beyond, and 1 in 4, have a plan to end their lives. And so if I were to say to you, as somebody who will interact with children or those who care for children in this capacity, you're coaching anybody, any human services profession, you have the capacity today to not only change a life, but save it because so many people are lonely. All I need you to do, my friend, is to show up. Can you do that for me? Can you drop your shoulders and wave at your neighbor? Can you give somebody a compliment today? Can you really sink your toes into the grass and be like, okay, okay, I'm going to give it my, it is that capacity of regulating our own bodies that give us the potential to understand that we are living in a lonely world, not a
mhm,
broken world, a very
mhm,
lonely world.
mhm,
And so all I need is the best from you.
mhm,
That's it. On any given day. Some days you're gonna crush it. Some days you're gonna be making homemade Play-Doh, which I think is dumb because you can get it at the dollar store. But, other days, you're gonna be like, "You barely have a bra on." Same, same. You're equally as powerful
mhm,
because our capacity to simply give it away is free.
mhm. And I love you say, it is actually damaging to tell people to survive from one holiday to the next. There's all these very common conversations that we think is just normal. This is how we do business, where we're like 5 days till Christmas break, or 10
Well,
days
you
till
see
the
the
end of the school.
countdowns.
You see the countdowns,
Yeah.
and it's normalized from holiday to holiday. We are constantly counting down from one to one, and it is damaging, right? In this conversation, it actually doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't. It's there's other ways of being in schools that's possible that we could thrive ending
Mhm,
a school year and not just
mhm.
hang on.
Can you imagine? And then you would step into June, like, confident
Mhm,
and competent and ready to enjoy your system, your family, your people, and I
mhm,
just think it's not fair. I really think it's not fair. And I don't know, I mean, I think it's still reminiscent so much of this, like, go, go, go. You're not an effective human being unless you've done all the things. And, you know, we really wear, our exhaustion sometimes as a badge of honor.
mhm. Yeah, oh,
This
for
is
sure.
how much I've done today. And
Mhm,
I just as I'm as guilty as the next, right? You
mhm,
would not believe, and sort of my husband and I do this with each other a lot too. Like, we one up each other. Like, so what did you do today? And like sometimes I just make shit up because I'm like, and I did this and I did this and I did it's justifying that I'm on the road doing this much work when really, like, of course I spoke for 3 hours and then I had a nap because
mhm,
I'm in some city, and it's like I don't we have such a concern, I think, about people thinking we're lazy or not motivated enough. And I think that, this most recent generation is really thinking a lot about how they regulate their bodies. And they take a lot of time to be like, okay, just a second, I got to think about that. And I really admire that. And I think, I think it's the ability to understand that we don't have to achieve all the time. In fact, we will get there faster, better, and more connected if we are regulated. And, I often say to administrators these days, give your educators permission to say the curriculum doesn't matter.
mhm.
And they're like,
I
what
know.
about numbers? What about like, and I'm like, I just promise you, once you do that, there will
Mhm,
be fun back in classrooms and
mhm.
kids can't wait to learn.
Mhm. That's exactly it. And I know you and I talked about this kind of before our last episode, that the type of coaching I do is human-centered coaching versus task-centered coaching. And I don't know. It's funny. I was like sharing with some friends about this, my human centered coaching, and one of them's like, it sounds like therapy. And it is the opposite of therapy, actually. It keeps us from having to go to therapy. And and it's all of your philosophy, and what you write in your books is it's about connection, right? And through connections, we actually get shit done faster. Wait, versus task centered coaching. I come in, here's the goal that I set, and I'm going to hold you accountable to that goal and make sure you're meeting your goals of the goals that someone else chose. And why aren't you meeting your goal? And people have the stress response of being like, I'm doing it. And they're not doing it. They're just smiling because they're just like, it's stressful to deal with someone that's like making them do something that they don't actually want to do. Right. When in fact, like, if we are connected, us humans, it's like the shortest distance between two people. Laughter is the shortest distance between two people, is what I've heard. And I think it's fantastic. But
Mm.
connection, right? Like, we get stuff done so much faster when we feel connected to other humans.
You want to know why?
Tell me.
Because we're regulated.
Yep.
And you have access to the best parts of yourself when you're regulated. When you're dysregulated, which is a completely normal response to when things get overwhelming or when we're anxious. And in fact, it keeps us safe. If we're out, frolicking in the bushes and out of the bushes jumps a bear, I don't want you to stay regulated. I don't want you to be like, oh shit, that's a pretty big animal. I want you to lose your friggin' mind and go into fight or flight, right? So our bodies do that by themselves.
Mhm.
And we often, automatically, I should say, but what we often do, I think, is we are now in often a state of overwhelm, and so we are assuming as though there is danger everywhere. And truly, it's going to take a concerted effort in our bodies to be able to get us to be back home in that process, right? And really sort of like, okay, we're okay. It's going to be okay. May's going to come. We got it.
Mhm.
These babies are going to be okay. I need to spend more time connected to me so that I can do the things that I do. And when we do well, and when we're sort of in that heightened state, we lose access to like lists and time and priorities and how do we do this effectively, like if you've ever sort of been in an emergency situation, you do know how to use the phone and call 911. You do know your address, but when it's a panic, you're like, I don't even, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just that example of like, how do we stay as regulated as we possibly can? And it often comes back to sort of just getting back to your body. So dropping your shoulders, wiggling your toes, relaxing your jaw, dropping your tongue from the roof of your mouth, um, on repeat.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, for sure. All right, I want to talk to you about a couple things that I just think is important for us to talk about and for folks to hear. One is comparative suffering. What is it? What are your thoughts about it? How's it damaging?
Mhm.
Tell us
Uh,
everything.
she's worse than me. At least I'm not her. At least he's um somebody has said this, I can't remember, but comparison is the thief of all joy.
Hmm.
And comparison is also normal.
Hmm.
We often, sort of, I mean, you think about everybody that we grade them on a bell curve, and we're comparing your skill to somebody else's based on, the same demographic or the same age or the same whatever, right? And I think comparison is so helpful in so many ways. When we get into this place of comparative suffering, it is really about, at least it's not, you're worse than me, or I'm not as bad as them. And we're using it as sort of a measuring stick for how much we should or could or don't have to take on.
Hmm.
And I think it's dangerous
Hmm.
because every human has the capacity to withstand or withhold other different things based on their stories. Okay. So I'll give you an example of this real quick. So we can have two kids. I can't remember if we talked about this in our first episode, but we can have two kids, for example, that, or two people that have survived refugee camps. Okay. And one family system can be surrounded by a regulated experience, despite the fact that they're in the same bomb shelter, they're doing through the same thing. And there's a few people in that space that are like, it's okay. It's okay. Let's just rest tonight. And tomorrow we're going to move out. We can hear the bombs, Dad. I know. I know. And they're far ways away. We're going to be okay. Okay. Exact same experience. Now, another family just, a mile down the road, maybe even the same camp, um, there's not a lot of regulation at the helm. And so it's like, I don't know where that is. I don't know. I don't know. Everybody stay awake because I don't know if this is safe. Okay. Now, if I see that both of those families that in the 3 months from now or whatever, and we're like, we don't understand why this one's more resilient. How come this system or this kid or this family did better, right? It They went through the exact same thing. I don't
Mhm,
understand. I mean, I work with a lot of police officers, and we can have people at the same scene and they interpret it entirely differently.
mhm,
The body keeps the score,
for sure.
and who's around you matter, but also what happens to you matters.
Mm,
It's not trauma isn't what happens to you, it's what happens inside of you. And so, for example, I always tell this story when I have a big fear of dogs, and maybe you don't. And so we're out frolicking, and out of the bushes jumps a Rottweiler. It's the same dog, it's the same day, it's the same sights and smells, but because you're gonna respond very different, you're not scared of that dog. You're gonna get down on your knees and be like, "Oh my gosh, where did you come from, Roddy?" And
mhm.
I'm gonna be like, "Ah, son of a bitch," and then the dog's gonna eat me, right?
Mhm,
So, based on the stories in our bodies, it really is dependent on how we respond to things, and so it's very
mhm,
difficult to compare your suffering. We like to align. You lost a child, I lost a child. We both got divorced. You did this, like whatever the deal is.
mhm,
And there's some alignment in those spaces. It just becomes very difficult when we assume that our experience in that space is better than or equal to or less than another.
mhm.
And it's just being conscious of that.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I'm a huge fan of well, not huge fan, but it's important. I talk a lot about toxic positivity, and I think compare like this can be related in terms of like at least it's not that bad, right? Oh, you're getting divorced. At least he didn't cheat on you, right? There's the like at least this didn't happen. Oh, I should be grateful because this other worse thing didn't happen. And how damaging for us to say to other people as well as us say to ourselves
Oh,
that
yeah.
at least this worst thing didn't happen. Mm-mm.
Yeah, and here's the thing, right? Like, I mean, the intention behind comparative suffering or at leasting other people is really we don't want them to hurt. We don't want us to hurt.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the intention is beautiful, right? The idea in this process is really like you cannot fix it. Don't
Mm.
try so hard to fix it. Really be much more comfortable with emotion, and then we get people back to those best, including yourself, right?
Yes. Yes, exactly. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is projections. What are they?
Mm.
What happens in let's, and say coaching, leadership, relationships? What are projections and what's the
It's
impact
a
of them?
Yeah, it's like I know exactly what you're going through because I too was a principal at a really busy school. I know
Mhm.
exactly what you're going through because my parents got divorced. I'm going to project what I know to be true onto you. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when we often talk about empathy, empathy is probably the best of these terms. And we really misunderstand it often as being something like projection.
Mhm.
I get what you're going through because I did too.
Mhm.
It's also very different. Empathy is also very different from sympathy, which is I'm so sorry. I'm feeling sorry for you because your mom died, right?
Mhm.
I'm not
Mhm.
feeling with you. So when we take sympathy and projection out of it, when we're really trying to get what another is going through, we actually have to suspend judgment and
Mhm.
suspend our own story.
Mhm.
I really wanna get, Becca, what it's like to be you, right? And people say, "Well, if I've never had," what if, "I'm not a mom, how can I do that? What if I've never died before?" Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, people say this to me all the time, right? I don't understand, I have never had anybody die close to me. Not died before, but never had but people would say this to me all the time in the inpatient unit, like, "How can you, help somebody with schizophrenia if you've never had schizophrenia?" Oh my goodness. The idea of empathy is it is a deep wondering about what it must be like to be you in this situation. And it is suspending judgment so that I don't have to tell you I know exactly what it's like because you don't.
Mhm.
Even if you've been through very similar things, you don't. And we don't want necessarily to align with your story. We want you to understand ours.
Mhm.
And I think that's just the piece. And so again, it is that like deep attempt at trying to get it. It
Mhm.
feels lonely, it feels isolating, and you try some emotion words on for size, and if they don't fit, they'll tell you.
Mhm.
"No, no,
Mhm.
no, that's not it. I don't feel lonely. I feel, like, so isolated and condescended."
Mhm,
Oh,
mhm.
okay, so that's different.
Oh,
Okay, got it, got it, got it. Okay.
mhm.
So it's like, and you're like, like they don't even see you.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And I think one of the most damaging words is the word should, and it lives in could live in projections, but and it's we can should ourselves, we can should other people, we can should everywhere and make a mess. But one way that I can, so first of all, something I know about being a human is I make up stories, you make up stories, right? And we are little judgment machines. Like I make things mean things, you make things mean things, right? Like I default in default mode have judgments, right? So it's not if I have judgments, it's when do I have judgments. So I think, first of all, part of empathy is being responsible for our judgments, noticing them, and being responsible for having them, right? I'm not bad for having them, but at least noticing them and not have them get in the way of my connection to someone else. And one red flag for me is when I hear the word should in my head,
Yep.
I'm like, oh, there's a judgment. That's going to be something in the way of me and this other person. And it reduces or eliminates the amount of empathy I can have with someone
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. 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 It's so true. It's that expectation about, sort of setting that bar.
Mhm,
And I think it's, it is just that a bit of reflection when we hear ourselves doing that. There's nothing wrong with it. Everybody does it all the time. Giving ourselves some grace in that moment and really being able to sort of sink into like, huh, what's that about? Right? Why do I think I should be doing that right now? And, quite honestly, maybe I should. But let's
mhm,
really figure out, what that's about. And I think it's just, again, that slowing down and that pausing a little bit is going to be probably one of the greatest superpowers if you can navigate it well in this next generation.
mhm. I love it. Thank you so much for coming back on, sharing your brilliance with me, with the listeners. I love it. I love talking to you. I so appreciate your vibrance and boldness in the world. You are a very special light.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And I can't wait for you to
Mhm.
come on over to our podcast too. That's coming up.
I
And
know. Yeah, soon.
yes, I would love your community be a part of ours because I think we do so much of the same great work.
I agree.